Hello, I'm Marcia Hale. I'm the Volunteer Engagement Coordinator here at the Hillsboro Public Libraries, and I'm going to show you a family recipe that I learned from my dad. My mom was a first-generation Polish immigrant, and I honestly have to say I'm not a big fan of Polish foods. But I did grow up on soul food because my dad was a Kentucky hillbilly, and this was one of the staples of our family growing up, and it's called fried cabbage. This is Southern style fried cabbage. So as we're coming up onto the St. Patrick's Day holidays and whatnot, this would make a great side dish for your St. Patrick's celebrations, or any time that you want something really filling and really satisfying. It's full of vitamins, got lots of fiber in it, and depending on how you cook it, it can be low calorie, but we're gonna make it the Southern style way, which is full of fat, because we're using bacon. So the way you start off with this, first thing we need to do is we're going to take some bacon, whatever kind you like. I just have natural choice bacon. You put it in a skillet here. I've chopped it up, and depending on how bacony you want it, put as much as you'd like. I'm using probably 3/4 of a package. We're going to cook that bacon. So obviously, if you're using bacon, this kind of makes this a rather fatty dish. So if you're watching calories, you may want to do less bacon. You might want to use turkey bacon. Kind of up to you. If you're a vegetarian, can you do this without bacon? Sure you can. You're just going to have to add a little more spice to it. Lots of people will just make this without any meat in it at all. I prefer to do it the way my dad taught me, which is more bacon the merrier. So we're going to let that bacon cook up here. In the meantime, I'm going to take my cabbage head and get rid of the core. I use regular cabbage. I suppose you could do this with a Napa cabbage if you wanted, but I've always done just plain old cabbage. So you could chop this if you want. I always remove the outer layer of cabbage leaves because those are generally pretty tough. And I usually just break it up into big chunks like this. This is one of these dishes that I think are much better the second day around. So you but you can actually have this from prep being on the table, probably done within about a half hour. So we're going to have quite a lot of cabbage here. I'm going to take part of the cabbage here and just kind of put it into a little bit larger chunks. Get rid of the end piece. The other thing you'll need for my version of Southern Fried Cabbage is a can of whole tomatoes. Any kind that you like. You can use a fire roasted kind. You can use the ones that are seasoned with Mexican spices or with Italian spices. It's whatever you like. I'm just using the plain, and I'm using 2 cans, or you could use 1 large can. So we're going to add that as soon as our bacon finishes cooking. And the other thing you'll need is an onion. I use just a yellow onion. You can use whatever flavor you like. I like a good strong yellow or white onion because you wouldn't want that extra spiciness that the onions will bring to the dish. The other things we're going to use in this dish is a little bit of black pepper. I'm going to throw in a little bit of garlic because honestly, what doesn't need garlic? And I use some crushed red pepper. My dad always used whole red peppers, dried red peppers. And he liked his spicy. I no longer can eat as spicy food, so I like to use the dried peppers just out of the little bottle here so that I can kind of have a better control over how much goes in. So as your bacon is frying up, make sure that it gets nice and crispy. some people, when they cook this, add sugar to the recipe. I have never done that, but people have used white sugar, they use Splenda, they use brown sugar, and I think it's really not necessary. I believe that your bacon is going to add enough sweetness. However, because I'm adding the tomatoes, if you want to kind of cut the tartness of the tomatoes, you can sprinkle a little bit of sugar. As much as you like, I don't think you need to put a lot in, because your bacon is going to carry the majority of the flavor here. Nothing smells better than bacon. Again, if you don't want to use the bacon, you do need to have some sort of fat in this dish. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, I would recommend using olive oil to be able to, because the next thing we're going to do is caramelize the onions. So you got to have some sort of fat in order to do that. So if you wanted to substitute, you want to make this a more vegetarian dish, then don't use bacon and use some olive oil, a good flavored olive oil that you like, and then you're going to caramelize your onions. So I would not class this recipe as being low in calories, because it isn't really, because you've got bacon in it. If you go the vegetarian route, yeah, you are going to have a fairly low calorie dish, probably around, I would say, anywhere from between 150 to 200 calories a serving. It'll be filled with vitamin K, vitamin C, because cabbage has lots of that. It has a lot of fiber. It has a fair amount of antioxidants in it. And cabbage is also considered great for reducing inflammation. However, adding the tomatoes are not great for reducing inflammation, so you kind of have to figure, okay, what are you going for? Are you going for reducing inflammation? Then don't put the tomatoes in. If you don't care about that, add the tomatoes. I think they add a lot of flavor to this dish. I'll let that bacon get a little crispier. My dad always made this dish in a cast iron skillet, even though he added tomatoes to it. Those of you who are cast iron skillet purists will know that you do not really want to add tomatoes to a cast iron skillet. Although I have always done it, and I still have the same cast iron skillet he always used. I haven't seen that it has killed it that much. I just make sure that I clean it out after I use it. So our bacon's just about done. Now it's kind of up to you as to how much bacon grease you actually want to have left in the pan. Sometimes I drain it, sometimes I don't. It just kind of depends on how I'm feeling and how much cabbage I have. So when you get your bacon to a fairly crispy amount, and you don't have to cook it completely done, because it's going to go back into the pan here in just a minute. So you're going to take your bacon out. We're going to caramelize the onions. And I have quite a bit of bacon grease in here. And that's going to caramelize our onions. Okay, so there's quite a bit of bacon grease in there. You may not want that much, so you could pour some of it off. I'm going to put the onions in. And however you like to chop your onions, I actually like to have quite a bit of onion so that it's obvious in the recipe. If you like it chopped finer, by all means, chop it finer. And I'm using a whole, is about a medium-sized whole yellow onion. So it's going to take about 8 minutes or so for this onion to caramelize. And I've got the skillet here. It's an electric skillet. I have it probably up in about, I would say, 325, maybe 330. It's not quite 350. to get this onion caramelized. And you can just throw the onion in raw and just let it steam with the rest of the vegetables. I think if you caramelize it, it brings out the sweetness of the onion, and it will be a lot tastier than if you just like throw it right in right away. So those of you with high cholesterol may be absolutely looking at this and going, oh my God. Yes, obviously not a dish you would want to eat all the time if you are a little prone to clogging of the arteries. A lot of Southern cooking uses a lot of different types of fats, usually from pork, and so it can be something you might want to consider if you've got certain health issues. Kind of just depends on you. So our onions are caramelizing here nicely. And that's kind of what you're going for, a little bit of this browning here on the onion, without, of course, getting it too brown. So keep stirring it, moving it around. As to the bacon, as I said, you can use pretty much any kind of your favorite bacon. If you use the bacon that has the black pepper crust, then I would probably not add any additional black pepper. If you're using a very sweet bacon, obviously you wouldn't need to add any sweetener at all. So let's take some of these onions out. I'm going to pour just a tiny bit of that grease out, because there's quite a bit of grease in there. My onions are pretty slick thanks to all the bacon fat. And you do want to leave some of the grease because it's going to help wilt your cabbage when you put it in. And this is a non-stick skillet, so that also kind of makes the grease float around a bit. Even though I'm going to pour just a little bit of this grease off, we're still going to have plenty left because, of course, the bacon's going to go back in, and so are the onions, and they're both covered with the bacon grease. So I'm leaving just a little bit of the bacon grease in there. Didn't pour very much off. And the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add my onions and my bacon back. Give them a little bit of a stir. Then I'm going to take a can of tomatoes. And be careful when you do this because you're going to be now adding some liquid to a very hot skillet. So you don't want to stand right over it. So pour those slowly in your skillet. I like a lot of tomatoes in mine. You can use 1 can, you can use 2 cans, whatever floats your boat. So take a knife, kind of break them up a little bit. I'm going to add the second can. And before I add the full can of tomatoes, I'm going to put in my cabbage. I'm just going to layer this cabbage in the skillet. This is one of my favorite dishes on a cold winter day. It warms you up, and it's spicy. When we would have this as one of the parts of our meal, my dad would include always freshly made cornbread. Put the rest of the tomatoes here on top. So we'd have this with freshly made cornbread. Usually ham would be the meat of choice. He made boiled potatoes, which were boiled with ham hocks. So yes, clogging your arteries right off the bat, but so, so delicious. Okay, so now we have our cabbage in there. Now, interestingly enough, this is all my dad would do. It's the onions, the bacon, the tomatoes, and the cabbage. That's it. Again, you don't need to add salt. Bacon has plenty of it. I like to add a little bit of garlic because, frankly, everything needs garlic. I'm going to add a little bit of black pepper, however much you want. And because I like a little bit of spice, we're going to put a little bit of red pepper. And again, this is one of those things, my dad would use a whole red pepper and he would snap it and put it into the dish. And depending on how big that pepper was, would be how spicy your cabbage would be. So you do want to, you can always add more. So I got a lot of cabbage in here. So what you want to do is you kind of want to get the cabbage sort of worked around so that the bacon and the onions and it gets covered in the grease down here. Because you're going to want to melt, or you're going to want to wilt this. So we're going to turn it up to about 350. And then we're going to put a lid on to just let this cabbage start steaming. This can be ready from the time it starts cooking, depending on how crispy you like your cabbage. It can be ready in as little as 10 minutes, or I like to leave it cook for about 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes as much, depending on how much cabbage I have. This is a lot of cabbage in here, so I'm probably going to let it go for probably about 20-25 minutes. And it'll be fine. You just want your cabbage tender. I think this is better the second day once all the flavors have had a chance to kind of marry overnight. And of course, store it in the refrigerator and then heat it up the next day. And it is absolutely delicious. So we're going to let that cook down. And we'll show you what the finished product will look like in just a second. Okay, so our cabbage has been steaming away here for about 8 minutes or so. As you can see, it's nicely wilted, and we had a huge mound of cabbage. It wilts down quite a bit. And now I'm just going to keep kind of moving things around so that you get your onions, your bacon, tomatoes all incorporated. Now would be a great time to do a little taste test. See if you need any more seasoning. So I'm going to take a little bit of cabbage out here. One piece. Here's a little piece with the onion. Remember, it's going to be hot when you take it right out of the pan there, so I'm going to burn my mouth. I'll get my water over here just in case. So let's take a little bite of this, see how it's tasting. Delicious. At this point, cabbage has some crunch to it. It tastes very cabbagey. You're not really tasting very much of the onion and the bacon yet. That's why I think it's good to have it continue to cook for just a little bit longer. And at this point, so that you get those flavors to marry, turn your heat down, way down to a simmer, about 200, 225. And I would say just let it cook for another 10 or 15 minutes. If you leave this set for the next day, the cabbage is going to take on a very orangey color because the tomatoes will kind of infuse it with a tomatoey color. And the taste, the flavor will be absolutely stunning. If you feel that it needs a little more flavoring, now's the time that you would To me, you can never have enough garlic. So to me, you add a little more garlic. Yes, you can use fresh garlic if you prefer. I think it's not quite spicy enough. So I'll add a little more red pepper to it. A couple of twists of black pepper. Again, a lot of people do add sugar. They either use brown sugar or plain old white sugar. I've seen some recipes call for as much as a half a cup to a cup of sugar. I can't imagine, because I believe the bacon is going to add enough sweetness. But if you are not a big cabbage fan and you would like a little bit more sweet to your food, then by all means add some sugar. I would start with a small amount of sugar and then adjust to taste. Now you can see the cabbage is starting to take on a more orangey hue from the tomatoes as it cooks a little bit. Remember to make sure that you caramelize those onions, so that brings out the sweetness of the onion. Serve this with a nice cornbread or any kind of crusty, fresh from the oven bread. To me, it's a meal in itself, but you can certainly add other things to it. I think this would go nice with a nice cold cucumber salad, with a little bit of green onion in the cucumbers, some cornbread, and a big bowl of this, and that is a yummy, yummy, delicious winter and early spring meal. So that's my dad's Southern Fried Cabbage. Thank you.